Hello and welcome back to studying. Today we'll be still working on the content area 4, professional values and ethics. This, according to these books, is 19% of the test. Um, so this section here we're focusing on, I've been calling subsection 1, 2, and 3. So this is covering competency number 11, professional values and ethical issues. In this book, there are 13 questions, and in this book, there are 18 questions. So I'm going to start with this book because I'm doing this video before lunch. All right. So according to this, question number 9. Actually, I need to get my. So I'll get us to question number 9 in the rationales. And then ask question number 9. Question number 9 tells us a a school social worker is asked by a funder to conduct an evaluation of a youth services program. The evaluation is based on personal interviews with middle school children who are participating in the program. After explaining the nature, extent, duration, and risks of participation, what documentation will be needed in order for the social worker to ethically conduct the evaluation? The 4 choices all start with the word written. A, written consent from the children's guardians. Written assent from the children and consent from their guardians. Written consent from the children, and written agency permission as the children's guardians already consented to service participation. So here we have to know the difference between consent, C-O-N-S-E-N-T, and assent, A-S-S-E-N-T. And knowing the difference between that apparently is going to be the significant aspect of this question. It tells us the correct answer is written assent from the children and consent from their guardians. According to the rationale, competently conducting, and this is bold, evaluations of practice requires skill and knowledge. There are also many ethical considerations. Social workers engaged in evaluation should obtain voluntary and written informed consent from participants when appropriate without any implied or actual deprivation or penalty for refusal to participate, without undue inducement to participate, and without due regard for the participants' well-being. Let's try that. And with due regard for the participants' well-being, privacy, and dignity. Informed consent should include information about the nature, extent, and duration of the participation requested, and disclosure of the risks and benefits of participation in the research. This whole section is italicized, and I'm going to switch glasses. That's better. This whole section, next paragraph, is italicized. When evaluation or research participants are incapable of giving informed consent, including due to being below the age of consent, Social workers should provide an appropriate explanation to the participants, obtain the participants' assent to the extent they are able, and obtain written consent from those legally authorized to act on their behalf. The test taking strategies applied in this section says this is a recall question which relies on social workers being fully informed of ethical standards of evaluation and research. The correct answer is that which is required for the social worker to ethically conduct the evaluation. In that section, the social worker to ethically conduct the evaluation is in quotes. When questions concern ethical behavior, the 2018 NASW Code of Ethics must be remembered. Written consent is necessary but not sufficient, as the assent of the children is also needed. Assent is a willingness to participate even though a child is not legally able to provide authorization. Children are not able to provide written consent, as consent indicates authority to make legal decisions, which those under the age of majority are not able to do unless emancipated. Lastly, separate informed consent procedures are needed for evaluation and research. Those given for service participation cannot be used to indicate that participation in evaluation and research are permissible. Written permission from the agency is not sufficient, as it is not legally authorized to act on the behalf of the children and their guardians. So again, in that question, they were saying written consent from the children's guardians, which is true. That was A, however, it wasn't enough. B, being written assent from the children, meaning a willingness to participate, and consent from their guardians. C, written consent from the children. They used the word consent, meaning being able to, where did it say, consent indicates authority to make legal decisions, and children, didn't say how old, the middle school children who are participating in the program. So 12 to 13, 14, depending on the middle school. And then fourth, the D answer, written agency permission, as the children's guardians already consented to service participation. No, because the agency is not sufficient and is not legally authorized to act on the behalf of the children or their guardians. And that gives the answer and rationale to the first question that we'll cover here in professional values and ethical issues. The next question covered is question 49. Question 49 asks, in an initial meeting with a man who is seeking assistance after several arrests, a social worker determines that his reasoning is significantly impaired, as he admits to using drugs before the meeting. The social worker wants to obtain the man's consent to find out more about his arrests and begin providing services aimed at assisting him to meet his basic needs. However, the social worker questions his ability to understand what the social worker is asking and understand the information provided on the agency's consent form. The social worker should waive the informed consent procedures, since the man is in need of services now, Ask the man to sign the consent form, which will be reviewed with him at a later time. Use verbal informed consent procedures in lieu of written forms given his impairment. Arrange to meet the man at a later time when informed consent can be obtained. Did you kind of come across the one that absolutely could not be the right answer? Um, so their answer, their rationale, D, of course, arrange to meet the man at a later time when informed consent can be obtained. Even before reading the rationale, which is quite a bit, uh, you don't, you just can't waive the informed consent process. It's a legal form. Um, so the correct answer is D, arrange to meet the man at a later time when informed consent can be obtained. The rationale that they provide is social workers' commitment to, bolded here, informed consent is based on client's right to self-determination. The informed consent process is one of the clearest expressions of social workers' respect for the client's dignity and worth as individuals to make choices which are best suited to meet their needs. A client must have the right to refuse or withdraw consent. Social workers should be prepared for the possibility that clients will exercise these rights. Social workers should inform clients of their rights and help clients make thoughtful and informed decisions based on available facts and information about potential benefits and risks. Social workers must be familiar with informed consent requirements concerning clients' rights to consent, especially when working with those who are incarcerated, working with children, working with individuals with cognitive impairments, and so on. While laws and regulations vary in interpretations and applications of informed consent standards, there are essential standards in all processes which are needed for the validity. First, coercion and undue influence must not have played a role in clients' decisions. A social worker, as social workers, often maintain control over approving benefits, admissions into programs, and termination of services. They must ensure that clients do not feel pressured to grant consent based upon this control. At some point in previous questions, we've also had the mandated clients. So those clients obviously do feel pressured. We have to definitely let them know you have the right to say no to these services, but they also have the right to accept the consequences that will be imposed by them on them by the other agencies. So that was the first, coercion, undue influence, all that is not allowed to play a role. Second, social workers must not present clients with general, broadly worded consent forms that may violate clients' right to be informed and may be considered invalid if challenged in a court of law. The use of broad or blank consent forms cannot possibly constitute informed consent. Social workers should include details that refer to specific activities, information to be released, or interventions. Typical elements include details of the nature and purpose of a service or disclosure of information. Advantages and disadvantages of an intervention. Substantial or possible risks to client, if any. Potential effects on clients, families, jobs, social activities, and other important aspects of their lives. Alternatives to the proposed intervention or disclosure, and anticipated costs for clients. This information should be presented to clients in clear, understandable language. Consent forms should be dated and include reasonable expiration date. Many consent forms can be obtained through your county agencies. As a person who has worked in nonprofit and county contract agencies, when the county holds the contract for those agencies, they expect us to use uh, their forms or a kind of a duplicate of their form. Of course, remembering the test is kind of focused towards those who are in relative private practice, and so if you find yourself wondering, how do I get a hold of some of these really good forms that can't be challenged in court, a good place to start is with yours or a local or nearby county agency. If you're in that county and that's where you have your business, you might even be able to use the county form, rename the county form, uh, or something like that, or at least use it as a template to create your own form. But let's not get too digressed off of that. So don't give your people that you work with just some broad or blank or please sign this. This is the ROI. We'll fill it out later. No, not good. Third stipulation. Clients must be mentally capable of providing legal consent. That's kind of what we're focusing on in this question. If the person seems impaired in some way, there might be a strong reason to have this consent done later. In this case, in the question, the social worker determines that the client's reasoning is significantly impaired as the client admits to using drugs before the meeting. So there was obviously some sort of behavior, and it was like, tell me more. Clearly, clients with significant permanent cognitive defects may be unable to comprehend the consent procedure. Social workers should assess clients' ability to reason and make informed choices, comprehend relevant facts, and retain this information, appreciate current circumstances, and communicate wishes. This next little section is italicized. Some clients may be only temporarily unable to consent, such as individuals who are under the influence of alcohol or other drugs, or experiencing transient cognitive symptoms at the time consent is sought. Clients who are unable to consent at a given moment may be able to consent in the future if the incapacity is temporary. And that was the rationale for why D arranged to meet the man, the client, at a later time when informed consent can be obtained. So, test taking strategies applied. The scenario describes a man who is using drugs which interfered with his ability to give informed consent. It is not appropriate to waive consent procedures or have the man sign a form which he does not understand. And that covers question A, waive the informed consent since he's in need of services now, or ask him to sign the informed consent and we'll review with him later. So that covers that. Verbal consent procedures are also problematic as the social worker questions his ability to understand what she is asking. Thus, he, the client, cannot give consent if he is unable to understand parameters of the information to be gathered or the services to be delivered. The nature and purpose of the service, the advantages and disadvantages of an intervention, substantial or possible risks, anticipated costs, and so on. His impairment may be temporary as he admits to using drugs which interfered with his reasoning prior to the meeting. Arranging to meet him at a later time may result in him being in a mental state in which he can make informed choices and comprehend relevant facts, which are necessary elements for informed consent. That was, make informed choices and comprehend relevant facts. Necessary elements for informed consent. Moving on to question number 56. A social worker receives a counseling referral for a student who is getting a social work degree at a local university. The social worker teaches a course in the program but has not had the student in class. In order to handle the situation ethically, the social worker should determine how the student learned about the social worker in order to evaluate the appropriateness of the referral. Meet with the student to assess whether there are any problems that could interfere with the student's ability to appropriately practice in the field. Inform the student that services cannot be provided given the potential for a conflict of interest. Refer the student to a colleague who has experience treating mental health professionals who are impaired. And again, this is asking about you have received a counseling referral for a student who's getting a degree at a local university where you teach. You have not had the student in a class. So they're saying, in order to handle the situation ethically, and the rationale is C. It says, inform the student that services cannot be provided given the potential for a conflict of interest. You might wind up referring them to someone who doesn't work for there, but basically you're giving them the ethical reason why. You haven't had them in your classroom yet. So if you give them services and then have them in your classroom. So let's go over their rationale. The bolded word in here is called professional boundaries. Many ethical standards speak to the professional boundaries that social workers should maintain with clients. Social workers must ensure that they do not engage in dual or multiple relationships that may impact on the treatment of clients. Social workers should be alert to and avoid conflict of interests that interfere with the exercise of professional discretion and impartial judgment. Social workers should avoid potential or real conflicts of interest. Dual relationships can be simultaneous or consecutive. So, you probably already knew that if the person was a student in your classroom, you could not be their therapist. That's simultaneous. They're also indicating that if they could be, where they said potential or real conflicts of interest, if they could be your student, consecutive. Um, and also it's not in here, but possibly also the idea that you you some other student might be like, oh, you don't want to go to that, and just start giving their opinion, and it still could cause a conflict. But according to this, so here we have test taking strategies applied. In this scenario, the social worker cannot commence a relationship with the student given the presence of a dual relationship. I would have asked them to say of a potential, even though it hasn't happened yet. The student may not be able to be honest with the social worker if therapy were to begin, given a belief that what would be disclosed may impact his or her standing in the social work program. Okay. Con- Contrarily, the social worker may receive information that would otherwise not be known by a faculty member, calling into question the ability of the student to competently practice. Even though the social worker did not have the student in class, there is a conflict of interest as the social worker is a faculty member in the program. The means by which the student learned about the social worker does not impact the decision to treat the student. That's uh, that's going into answer one was determine how the student learned about the social worker in order to evaluate the appropriateness of the referral. The means by which the student learned about the social worker does not impact the decision to treat the student. Meeting with the student is inappropriate given the presence of an existing relationship. That, of course, B, meet with the student to assess whether there are any problems that could interfere with the student's ability to appropriately practice in the field. Referring the student is also inappropriate. Social workers should refer clients to other professionals when other professionals' specialized knowledge or experience is needed to serve clients fully, or when social workers believe that they are not being effective or making reasonable progress with clients and additional service is required. So if you'd be thinking what type of specialization or something, imagine you're working with a client and the client finds out about eye movement and desensitization therapy, EMDR, or reprocessing therapy. And they say, could we work together with that? And let's assume for a moment you don't have you don't have enough knowledge to feel comfortable doing that, and maybe not a certification for it. So you say no, but you could do EMDR with this therapist that is a colleague of mine. You absolutely can refer them in that situation. Um, but just a generalist like this, uh, it wouldn't. You just have to tell the person, because of the conflict of interest, we cannot be therapist and client. The next sentence is italicized. When making a referral, it is critical that a social worker refers to a competent provider, someone with expertise in the problem that a client is experiencing. So if you are a couples counselor or depression or anxiety and someone comes in with some significant trauma and you don't feel comfortable doing that, don't just refer to another therapist. Refer to someone you know that is like, yeah, I work with trauma all the time and I feel comfortable working with trauma. In the scenario, the social worker is unaware of the student's problem. Ah, there you go. You don't know what the problem is. You don't know what the specialty is. So in this question, you you don't just automatically refer away. Social workers unaware of the student's problem, so it is impossible to ensure that the provider is competent in this issue. In addition, the student may feel pressured to go to this provider as he or she was selected by a social worker who is a faculty member in his or her program. Inform the student that services cannot be provided given the potential for conflict of interest is the correct method in order to handle the situation ethically. And that was the question. In order to handle the situation ethically, the social worker should inform the student that services cannot be provided given the potential for a conflict of interest. I'm going to jump over to question 90. Which of the following consent procedures best, big bolded word, which of the following consent procedures best informs clients of the nature and expectations of the social worker client relationship, including confidentiality? Discussing written policies throughout the problem solving process, providing clients with copies of all signed written consent and other forms, asking clients to sign written consent forms prior to initial meeting, ensuring that written policies are updated regularly and signed by clients. Which of the following consent procedures best informs clients of the nature and expectations of the social worker client relationship, including confidentiality? The correct answer they give is A. And their rationale, discussing written policies throughout the problem solving process. Informed consent, that's bolded, informed consent is most often thought of in the context of the contracting stage with a client, which comes at the beginning of the professional relationship. This next section is italicized. To be effective, informed consent should be seen as an ongoing process. Informed consent can be integrated into each session with a client or at regular periodic intervals throughout a professional relationship. As the goals of the relationship change, informed consent should be revisited. Informed consent is the process through which social workers discuss with clients the nature of the social worker client relationship. Through informed consent, the social worker and client outline what the client can expect from the professional relationship, as well as what the social worker expects from the client's participation. Informed consent often includes a discussion of basic protocols, such as how to make or cancel appointments or the best way to contact the social worker. The process should also involve outlining what work will be done with and for the client and what expectations are for client involvement. Integral to the informed consent process is a discussion of client confidentiality. This next section is italicized. Using simple language appropriate to the developmental and language needs of the client, the social worker needs to explain to the client that he or she will generally keep information private, but there are specific instances when the social worker is required to break client confidentiality. We've talked about that before. It is at this point that the social worker should highlight that if he or she suspects child maltreatment based on information received from the client, the social worker must break client confidentiality to make a report of the suspicion to Child Protective Services. In some agencies or practice settings, informed consent involves the client signing a form that acknowledges receipt of certain information. Although a written tool is a good idea, it is important that there be additional methods for ensuring informed consent. In all cases, with or without written informed consent tools, the social worker and the client should discuss face to face expectations for confidentiality and when confidentiality will be breached. The social worker should use language that the client can understand. As with other forms of communication with clients, it is important to ensure that the client understands what is said with regard to informed consent. Test taking strategies applied. Here they talk about the word best. The qualifying word best indicates that more than one listed answer may be informative or useful, but the correct one is that which most effectively informs clients of the nature and expectations of the social worker client relationship. So, thinking about that for a moment, the question was, I've lost it. Here we go. Uh, which of the following consent procedures best informs the client of the nature and expectations of the social worker client relationship, including confidentiality? The qualifying word best indicates that more than one answer listed may be informative or useful, but the correct one is that which most effectively informs clients of the nature and expectations of the social worker client relationship. None of the incorrect answers speak to exchanges between social workers and clients about consent policies. They simply provide clients with or have clients sign written materials which is not sufficient for informed consent. Clients should have the opportunity to ask questions and have policies explained in clear, concise ways, which are easy to understand. The correct answer also acknowledges that informed consent is an ongoing process and does not just occur at intake. So, according to that, discussing written policies throughout the problem solving process was the best procedure that informed the client of the nature and expectations of the social worker client relationship, including confidentiality. Remember, in the rationale, is talking about there are times we have to break confidentiality, and the client should know that in advance. If the client knows that in advance and still chooses to openly share that they are doing something, or, depending on their age, have had something done to them, a child, a dependent adult, or an elder, or that they plan to do something to someone and it fits the Tarasoff category criteria. So, question 101. A social worker recently terminated with a client who made substantial progress in managing her anxiety. The former client has been asked by her church to facilitate a peer support group for others who have experienced similar problems. The former client is nervous about this request and asks the social worker to be a co-facilitator. The social worker feels that the former client would benefit from this peer interaction. In this situation, the social worker should assist with helping prepare for, but not co-facilitate the group, help co-facilitate for several sessions until the former client feels more comfortable, Agree to co-facilitate as the experience will be beneficial to the former client. Encourage participation while declining the request to co-facilitate. Leave you a moment. I gave you the eyes because, this is going to talk about a dual relationship. You went from being clinician and client to being colleagues. The rationale is D. Encourage participation. Please do it. You're going to do wonderful. Use the skills we talked about. Encourage participation while declining the request to co-facilitate. The social workers must ensure they do not engage in dual or multiple relationships. We touched on this a few questions ago. That must not engage in dual, bold, or multiple relationships. That may impact on the treatment of clients. And here is italicized. Dual or multiple relationships occur when social workers relate to clients in more than one relationship, whether professional, social, or business. Dual or multiple relationships can occur simultaneously or consecutively. So that simultaneously would be if you this was your client and your current client was asked to facilitate a group and asked you to, yeah, obviously you're probably thinking, well, yeah, obviously. Consecutive, meaning former client, still can't. So, further in the rationale, social workers should be alert to and avoid conflicts of interest that interfere with the exercise of professional discretion and impartial judgment. Social workers should inform clients when a real or potential conflict of interest arise and take reasonable steps to resolve the issue in a manner that makes clients' interests primary and protects clients' interest to the greatest extent possible. In some cases, protecting clients' interest may require termination of the professional relationship with proper referrals of clients. Social workers should not take unfair advantage of any professional relationship or exploit others to further their personal, religious, political, or business interests. Social workers should not engage in dual or multiple relationships with clients or former clients in which there is a risk of exploitation or potential harm to the client. In instances when dual or multiple relationships are unavoidable, social workers should take steps to protect clients and are responsible for setting clear, appropriate, culturally sensitive boundaries. So, where might something like that take place? Unavoidable. I can think of one as a drug and alcohol counselor. Um, some years later, a person I knew in my college, in my junior college, arrived as a client. Um, I was the drug and alcohol counselor. Uh, I made sure that right at the beginning, because that person was known by me and also known by a family member of mine, I let them know right from the beginning. In this setting, you are a client, and nothing you say or do here will ever be said to anyone, including family members, outside of this place by me. And I encourage that you do not share that information also. And that person agreed and actually stated that they felt better by having that conversation because initially they felt quite ashamed that they were coming and that I was the counselor. Um, we did not have a connection outside of college. It had been many years, so yeah, that they felt much better. They concluded the program, and we've had no contact since either. So, test taking strategies applied. The scenario suggests that a former client would like to enter into a new relationship with the social worker. While this new relationship is professional in nature, it still reflects the existence of a dual relationship. While perhaps not readily apparent, the former client may be harmed by this relationship with the social worker. For example, the client may need treatment again in the future. Being a co facilitator with the social worker would preclude him or her from providing services, thereby eliminating the availability of a clinical support for the former client if needed. In addition, the client may personalize or feel that examples provided by the social worker during the group sessions relate to the former client's own service provision. While the former client is not currently receiving services from the social worker, dual or multiple relationships can occur consecutively, such as described in this scenario. Co facilitating, even for a short time, that goes along with the assist them with preparing, but don't facilitate, uh, help them start it, help co facilitate for several sessions. Um, Co facilitating, even for a short time, would be inappropriate. In addition, assisting the former client in preparing for the group is also problematic. The former client may experience anxiety during this process and confuse the social worker's support with a therapeutic alliance. It is best for the social worker to keep involvement, even encouragement, to a minimum. Be careful with some of these questions. You could find yourself justifying just a little bit, and that could lead you to an incorrect answer. I mean, what if you were to say, "Oh, I'll help them prepare by giving them a blank copy of the curriculum we used, but I won't co-facilitate with them." While that does say you're not co-facilitating with them, you could convince yourself A would be the right answer. And since they gave it to you first, and especially if this comes at a point where you're feeling the crunch of time in your test, oops. Moving on to question 112. At the conclusion of the sixth session, a client states that her attorney would like to speak to the social worker. When the social worker asks about the nature of the request, the client states that she does not know, and the social worker will need to contact the attorney to find out. Just off the top of your head, do you initiate contact or not? Contact the attorney immediately with the assurance that all legal matters will be discussed with the client in the future session. Decline the request until the social worker's role is clarified and the client's expectations are better understood. Explore with the client why she is not being forthcoming about the reasons for the attorney request. Arrange a time for the client to be present during the social work attorney conversation to ensure that the client is aware of what is disclosed. Shocking. The rationale is B. Decline the request until the social worker's role is clarified and the client's expectations are better understood. Some of the other answers may actually be done, but in this context of ethical, professional values and ethical issues, decline it. Policies, procedures, regulations, and laws. Those four words are bolded. Policies, procedures, regulations, and laws can have a profound impact on social work practice. Social workers who treat clients involved with the legal system must be aware of problems that can arise prior, during, and after the delivery of services. Many of these issues can be avoided by clarifying and defining the nature of a social worker's role. For example, some clients may be uncertain about what to expect from psychotherapy or have unrealistic hopes. Ethically, a social worker is expected to work jointly with clients in the development of treatment plans. By discussing what can and cannot be provided, clients are offered realistic portrayals of what may be expected from therapy, which may assist in deciding whether to work with a particular social worker. Test taking strategies applied. In this scenario, the client appears to be directing the social worker, and her behavior suggests that she believes the social worker is obligated to contact the attorney. In fact, the social worker would have no such obligation and would be wise to decline the client's request in order to clarify the social worker's role and to better understand the client's expectations. If the social worker elects to contact the attorney prior to discussing the specifics and implications with the client, there is a risk that the client may interpret the social worker's actions as an implied agreement to become involved in the legal matter. If the social worker and client ultimately determine that the client's expectations were inconsistent with the social worker's understanding of his or her role, there may be a need for a referral to another professional who is better suited to the client's needs. The incorrect answers all focus on contacting the attorney or viewing the client's lack of information as resistance to discussing the legal matter. There is no indication that the client is being resistant, and to assume so is adding material to the question. Awesome. Don't add material to the question. And of course, the inverse of that is don't remove. Oh, they asked that? That can't be right. They didn't mean that. That will lead to the wrong answer. Question number 120. A social worker is providing counseling to a client who is having trouble in her workplace. The client feels isolated as she does not have any meaningful collegial relationships in her job. Collegial. Not many words stump me. The client feels isolated as she does not have any meaningful collegial relationships in her job. The client, who is a lesbian, feels that her support system is limited to her partner, with whom she has been living with for the past 2 years. At the end of a session, the client gives the social worker a hug while thanking her for understanding the situation. The social worker, who has a policy to not have physical contact with her clients, hesitates, which causes the client to accuse her of being homophobic. In this situation, the social worker should ask the client why the action is being viewed as homophobic, explain the reasons for the rules about not touching clients, continue to hug the client after apologizing for the hesitation, provide assurance that the response was not meant to be homophobic. B. Explain the reasons for the rule about not touching clients. There are many ethical standards, including those on touching clients, that speak to, bolded, professional boundary issues that social workers face in practice. Often, the maintenance of appropriate boundaries can be challenging for social workers. Social workers should not engage in physical contact with clients when there is a possibility of psychological harm to the client as a result of the contact, such as cradling or caressing the client. Social workers who engage in appropriate physical contact with clients are responsible for setting clear, appropriate, and culturally sensitive boundaries that govern such physical contact. The 2018 NASW Code of Ethics leaves the door open but cautions social workers that they bear the responsibility for ensuring that no negative consequences ensue. The language leaves open the possibility that when used responsibly, touch might occasionally make clinical sense, perhaps by helping a client stay grounded or feel less isolated or overwhelmed. However, social workers using touch within the context of a therapeutic alliance must always carefully consider clients' factors such as presenting problems and symptoms, personal touch, and sexual history, ability to differentiate types of touch, and clients' ability to assertively identify and protect their boundaries, as well as the gender and cultural influences of both clients and social workers. Social workers should have clear policy about touching, self disclosure, and other boundary areas which are applied consistently to client situations. One of the most effective ways to establish clear boundaries, professional boundaries, is for a social worker's behavior to set the standard for meetings with clients. Appropriate dress and appropriate behavior be displayed, and talk should not include a social worker discussing his or her personal life. Rare exceptions about disclosing personal life, but some of them could be if you are doing a couples counseling and you find that it would be beneficial to a couple that is, say, one feels shame or something about communicating in a certain way, and you normalize it by saying this. Very common. I know lots of people who communicate that way initially. Myself and my wife even did that at one time. And we discovered if we changed the wording of how we approached that, it was more gentle and there were less uh, attempts at defensive response, and then it's right back to the clients. That way, the client doesn't feel like I'm spending my money to learn about you and your relationship and the dogs you have and stuff like that. Test taking strategies applied. The scenario describes a client's reaction to a hesitation by a social worker to a hug at the end of a session. And that's italicized, at the end of a session. There's no indication that physical touch has been discussed between the client and the social worker in this or any prior interaction. Remember what the last question says? Don't add to it. If you think in your head, this is my third session with this client, and we had a really good breakthrough, and you're making up the vignette, don't add to it. There is no indication that physical touch has been discussed between the client and the social worker in this or any prior interaction. The client may be accusing the social worker of being homophobic due to an exchange with someone else in the past. In this scenario, it is necessary for the social worker to explain her policy on physical touch, as well as other boundary issues. Educating clients about the 2018 NASW Code of Ethics is essential so they can better understand therapeutic or helping alliances and not confuse them with friendships or romantic relationships. None of the incorrect responses include this critical education. The, in, the, they bring up educating the clients uh, about the 2018 NASW Code of Ethics sometimes is very helpful. This isn't just my code of ethics. This isn't just my code of conduct as your therapist and the therapist of other people. This is a strong recommendation by my governing agency, by, if we were using it as if the board, but in this case as the National Association of Social Workers Code of Ethical Conduct. And it is not a slight on you. It is how I conduct myself professionally in a non-judgmental, caring way, so that they go. The later the thing could say, and the client accepted and apologized because of an interaction that happened with someone else. But again, don't add. It would not be appropriate to explore the client's beliefs about being rejected on her sexual orientation when the session is ending. In addition, there is no indication that the client's statement is anything other than a misunderstanding about professional boundaries between the social worker and the client. The client may not realize the social worker has a policy which is applied to all clients. Continuing to hug the client would be contraindicated, especially given the accusation. It violates the social worker's policy on physical contact and treats this client differently than other clients. Simply telling the client that the social worker is not homophobic does not provide an explanation for the hesitation. It also misses the opportunity to educate the client about the importance of maintaining professional boundaries and differentiating therapeutic alliance from other personal relationships. Number 124. The goal of a client with terminal cancer is to receive hospice services at home. Her health has deteriorated rapidly, but the social worker is having difficulty finding an appropriate provider due to the complexity of the client's medical condition and her current living situation. In order to meet the needs of the client, which social work value is most critical when intervening? dignity and worth of the person, competence, integrity, social justice. Really a knowledge question. Gotta know those. There are a lot of bold words here. I'm going to give them right here at the moment. Um, Hold on. I want to make sure. Sorry. There. The correct answer is dignity and worth of the person. The rationale for this is the mission of the social work profession is rooted in a set of professional values. These core values, service, social justice, dignity and worth of a person, importance of human relationships, integrity, and competence are the foundation of social work's unique purpose and perspective. There we go. These core values reflect what is unique to the social work profession. Core values and the principles that flow from them must be balanced within the context and complexity of the human experience. When providing service, social workers' primary goal is to help people in need and to address social problems. Social workers, this is italicized, social workers elevate service to others above self interest. Social workers are encouraged to volunteer some portion of their professional skills with no expectation of significant financial return. Pro bono service. Social workers value social justice, challenging social iniquities on behalf of vulnerable and oppressed individuals and groups of people. Italicized, social workers' social change efforts are focused primarily on issues of poverty, unemployment, discrimination, and other forms of social injustice. Social worker respect the inherent dignity and worth of the person, treating each person in a caring and respectful fashion, mindful of individual differences and cultural and ethnic diversity. Social workers promote clients' socially responsible self determination. This part's italicized. Social workers seek to enhance clients' capacity and opportunity to change and to address their own needs. Social workers recognize the central importance of human relationships, as relationships between and among people are an important vehicle for change. Social workers engage people as partners in the helping process. Social workers, this is italicized, social workers seek to strengthen relationships among people in a purposeful effort to promote, restore, maintain, and enhance the well being of individuals, families, social groups, and organizations and communities. Integrity means the social worker behaves in a trustworthy manner. Italicized, social workers act honestly and responsibly and promote ethical practices on the part of the organizations with which they are affiliated. Social workers practice within their area of competence. Ever heard that working in your scope of practice or out of your scope of practice? Social workers practice within their area of competence and develop and enhance their professional expertise. Continuing education units. Social workers continually strive to increase their professional knowledge and skills and to apply them in practice. Test-taking strategies applied. Social workers should uphold all social work values. However, this scenario contains the qualifying word most, which is not capitalized. So that's why it was not, in order to meet the needs of the client, which social work value is most critical when intervening. It contains the qualifying word most, which in this case is not capitalized. The problem of finding an appropriate provider presents a barrier to fulfilling the client's wish to die at home. Thus, the social worker must focus on developing creative solutions to promoting the client's need for self-determination. Competence involves practicing within one's expertise, developing as a professional, which are not prevailing issues in this scenario. Integrity, being honest and trustworthy, is also not directly related to the situation presented. Lastly, pursuing social change or justice for those who are oppressed and disenfranchised does not apply, as there is no indication that the barrier encountered resulted from oppression or unequal treatment. Number 128. Fee splitting. Fee. Fee splitting is unethical in social work practice because it, get my hands free. Fee splitting is unethical in social work practice because it represents a conflict of interest which can adversely impact clients' care, establishes rates which do not consider what clients can afford to pay, creates prohibited dual relationships, which are boundary violations, occurs without client consent, which is mandatory for all treatment decisions. So here you have to know that fee splitting is unethical and why, and probably the definition of fee splitting. The answer on that, it says, is A, represents a conflict of interest which can adversely impact client care. Social workers must be familiar with bolded ethical standards related to payment of services. You're obviously expecting to get paid for your services, but it has to be in an ethical manner, especially if you're in private practice. There are many practices which are not ethical, such as setting unreasonable fees, bartering in most instances, and soliciting extra fees from clients when services can be provided by agencies at no additional cost. In addition, an arrangement where social workers accept a percentage of other independent providers' fees for professional services that they are not directly provided is not ethical. Receiving money for referrals made to other professionals constitutes fee splitting. This is strictly prohibited. Cost of social work services should be established at market value and paid per agreement or contract with clients or services actually received. So, depending on where you live, your fee for service might be more expensive than a colleague that you had in college that lives in another area. That colleague might be in a rural area with a predominantly um, middle to low income clientele. And so they might not be charging the amounts of money that you would be charging at a more affluent community. This is quoted, says, fee splitting represents a conflict of interest which may adversely affect client care and well-being. For example, clients may not necessarily be referred to the most appropriate professionals, but instead to those whom referring social workers have fee splitting or commission payment type arrangements. Fee splitting is not only prohibited for social workers, but other professionals as well. So even if you don't know what fee splitting is and you're going to run off to Google and ask it to define fee splitting, you got an idea right now that it seems to be if I refer a client to you, you charge that client and then you give me $10 for it. And so I refer 20 clients to you and you see all 20 clients in 1 week and I get $200 for that week for doing nothing else. And then I see my clients. Absolutely 100% no, 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 no. Test taking strategies applied. This is a recall question, which relies on social workers understanding the ethical issues regarding to payment for services and specifically the term fee splitting. So that's your test taking strategy. Know the definition and know the ethical issues. We're zipping up to question 152. We have 4 more questions left for this section in this book. Bartering, huh? 152. A social worker is working in a cultural community in which bartering is the acceptable practice for obtaining goods and services. In order for the social worker to accept goods from clients for the provision of services, all of the following criteria have to be met. And I do remember something about this. But I'm not going to say it yet. I don't want to mess things up for those who are like, stay on topic, you person of interest. Clients must demonstrate that these arrangements will not be detrimental. Remember, the question is asking all of the following criteria have to be met except bartering must be essential for the provisions of services. Coercion must not be used in the negotiation of the arrangement. Clients must initiate the request for the bartering arrangements. Why might a person use bartering? Well, saying it's cultural community might be something agriculture, farming. Let's see. The rationale is A. Remember, they're asking what is the incorrect answer. When we get to the test-taking strategy, it'll be talking about accept, the word accept, qualifying word accept. All of the following criteria except. So 3 answers are, well, no, I'm sorry. Yes, those 3 answers are correct. One of them is not. It is clients must demonstrate that these arrangements will not be detrimental. Bartering arrangements, particularly involving services, create the potential for conflicts of interest, exploitation, and inappropriate boundaries in social workers' relationships with clients. Social workers should avoid accepting goods for services from clients as payment for the professional services. This next part's italicized. Social workers should explore and may participate in bartering only in very limited circumstances. When it can be demonstrated that such arrangements are an accepted practice among professionals in the local community, considered to be essential for the provision of services, negotiated without coercion, and entered into at the client's initiative and with the client's informed consent. Social workers, italicized, who accept goods or services from clients as payment for professionals' services assume the full burden of demonstrating that this arrangement will not be detrimental to the client or the professional relationship. That's why that is the answer. Clients must demonstrate that these arrangements are not detrimental? No. Social workers who accept this assume the full burden of demonstrating that this arrangement will not be detrimental to the client or the professional relationship. Test taking strategies applied. While bartering in social work is extremely rare, the 2018 NASW Code of Ethics provides specific guidance about the criteria which must be met in order for it to occur. While these standards are located in provisions about payments for services, they speak to the potential that such financial arrangement have for inappropriate professional boundaries between social workers and clients. The question contains the qualifying word accept. There it is. That requires social workers to select the response choice which is not specified in the 2018 NASW Code of Ethics with regard to bartering. When accept is used, when accept is used as a qualifying word, it is often helpful to remove it from the question and eliminate the three response choices, which must be done as per ethical standards. So saying, what three choices? This approach will leave the one response choice which is not required. Social workers, not clients, must demonstrate that bartering relationships are not detrimental. So, um, an example I can remember from college days in this topic was farming, agriculture community, a community that relies on their crops or their livestock. And until harvest or a process of livestock has been completed, they don't get paid. They don't get money. And of course, much of that money goes back into the next season. So um, they'll, of course, if it's a crop or if some consumable, or if their business provides a service, um, and it's something that you would be able to use, you would accept it in a bartering system if that was a choice that was agreed on, and it would be at fair market value. 100% fair market value. If some item um, is expected to bring $5 a unit, and they're seeing you and normally would pay $55 for your service, let's say, rural community, low price, low cost of living, $55 for your service, and they say, you know, here is 11 units of this item that you can make food with or something. You can do that. If you were to request 20 units, you would absolutely be in the wrong, and you would be detrimental to the client. On to question 158. After social workers determine that ethical dilemmas exist, they should next. So you're going along and you go, ooh, there are ethical dilemmas, plural. I don't know if that makes a difference, but just know that. After the social worker determines that ethical dilemmas exist, they should next. So, what's the very next thing after you determine that there is an ethical dilemma? Some of the answers are going to be something that should have done before, or something that is not the very next thing. Seek supervision to determine which agency policies impact the situation. Prioritize the ethical values which must be used to choose correct course of action. Weigh the issues in light of key social work values and principles. Determine the root cause of the problems so that they can be eradicated. Which just sounds right. The answer on there is C. Weigh the issues in light of key social work values and principles. Remember, they're asking the very next thing to do. Something else may have sounded good, but the very next thing to do after determining ethical dilemmas exist, weigh the issues in light of key social work values and principles. An ethical dilemma is a predicament when a social worker must decide between two viable solutions that seem to have similar ethical value. Sometimes two viable ethical solutions can conflict with each other. Social workers should be aware of any conflicts between personal and professional values and deal with them responsibly. In instances where social workers' ethical obligations conflict with agency policies or relevant laws and regulations, they should make a responsible effort to resolve the conflict in a manner that is consistent with the values, principles, and standards expressed in 2018 NASW Code of Ethics. In order to resolve this conflict, ethical problem solving is needed. There are 6 essential steps in ethical problem solving. Identify ethical standards as defined by the professional code of ethics that are being compromised. Always go to the code of ethics first. Do not rely on a supervisor or coworker. And that's determine whether there is an ethical issue or dilemma. There you go. You just determined. So we've done the first one. We've done the second one. Next, weigh ethical issues in light of key social work values and principles as defined by the Code of Ethics. Suggest modifications in light of the prioritized ethical values and principles that are central to the dilemma. Implement modifications in light of prioritized ethical values and principles. Monitor for new ethical issues or dilemmas. That was the last one. So the test taking strategy applied. We've kind of hit this one already. It's the word next. It's used to indicate that the order in which the response choices should occur is critical. Knowledge of the sequential steps in the ethical problem solving process is needed. The question states that there is already a realization that an ethical dilemma exists. Number two, once the issue has been identified, social workers must next weigh the ethical issues in light of key social work values and principles. Seeking supervision is a practical answer, which is incorrect, as it does not represent a step in the ethical problem solving model. So if you already knew that that was not a step, you'd know, throw that one out. Social workers often seek supervision when they are not sure of the correct course of action. The examination expects social workers to have knowledge about the proper actions to take based on the best practices in the field. Social workers cannot choose a correct course of action based on prioritized ethical values until they have been weighed in light of existing principles. Thus, this action will occur after the one specified in the correct answer. So, that's why you have to know these in order. I'm sure there's a mnemonic device out there. Um, that'll probably be a future video. Determining the root cause of problem is critical, but the question is asking for the sequential steps in ethical problem solving. The issue cannot be eradicated until all steps have been taken, making this answer also incorrect. A lot of wonderful, I know that that's a part of it question, but it's not the next. Question number 163 is our second to last question. Which of the following actions by a social worker is considered unethical according to the professional code of ethics? Charging rates which are significantly higher than those of other colleagues for the same service based on professional experience and training. Bartering in limited circumstances when it is an accepted cultural practice and not detrimental to clients or professional relationships. Soliciting private fees for providing services which are available through the social worker's employer or agency. Determining services to clients which are not paying overdue balances after financial contractual contractual arrangements have been made clear. Yeah. Which of the following actions by the social worker is considered unethical according to the professional code of ethics? You might think right off the bat, oh, well, yeah, you shouldn't. It'd be unethical to. We've already covered bartering, so I hope you figured that's not the unethical one, because in a question or so back, bartering's acceptable. Soliciting private fees for providing services which are available through the social worker's employer or agency. Could you imagine that's the answer that is unethical? Could you imagine working for a place, getting paid to work for a place, to provide a service to someone who comes in and you tell that someone, well, this is going to cost you this much in order to get this parenting class or something from me? Nah. Social workers' ethical responsibilities, that's bolded, ethical responsibilities include those related to payment for services. When setting fees, social workers should ensure that the fees are fair, reasonable, and commensurate with the services performed. Consideration should be given to clients' ability to pay. Social workers should avoid accepting goods or services from clients as payment for professional services. Bartering arrangements, particularly involving services, create the potential for conflicts of interest, exploitation, and an inappropriate boundaries in social workers' relationship with the clients. Social workers should explore and may participate in bartering only in very limited circumstances when it can be demonstrated that such arrangements are an accepted practice among professionals in the local community, considered to be essential for the provision of services, negotiated without coercion, and entered into at the client's initiative and with the client's informed consent. So if you're new to a place and somebody starts offering you produce for services, you may initially be like, "No, pay me." And then as you become knowledgeable in there or speak to a colleague and they say, "Oh no, I accept produce all the time." Oh, social workers who accept goods or services from clients as payments for professional services assume the full burden of demonstrating that this arrangement will not be detrimental to the client or the professional relationship. Social workers in fee-for-service settings may terminate services to clients who are not paying an overdue balance if the financial contractual arrangements have been made to clear the client. If the client does not pose an imminent danger to self or others, and if the client does not and if the clinical and other consequences of the current non-payment have been addressed and discussed with the client. Social workers should not terminate services to pursue a social, financial, or sexual relationship with the client. And this next part's italicized. Social workers should not solicit a private fee or other remuneration for providing services to clients who are entitled to such available services through the social worker's employer or agency. The test taking strategies applied. This is a recall question, which requires social workers to select the unethical action, according to the Professional Code of Ethics. So, of course, you have to know it. While the examination will never refer directly to the 2018 Code of Ethics, as there are other professional organizations with ethical mandates, it is helpful to read the 2018 NASW Code of Ethics and remember its standards when choosing between answers. Most questions on the examination will focus on the first section, which addresses social workers' ethical responsibilities to clients. The correct answer is always the one which most closely mirrors the standard, which is explicitly stated in 2018 NASW Code of Ethics. And for the last question of this almost 2-hour video, 169. A social worker employed in an agency setting receives a referral for a former girlfriend who he has not seen in 20 years. The client is Spanish speaking, and the social worker is the only staff linguistically competent to provide clinical services in Spanish. In order to act ethically in this situation, the social worker should Speak to a supervisor to disclose the prior relationship before meeting with the client. Inform agency personnel that he cannot provide services to this client. Meet with the client to determine the severity of the need in order to weigh the ethical options. Schedule an intake given the time that has passed prior to the relationship. What do you think the correct answer is? I mean, it's been 20 years, right? Don't do it. That's what they're saying. Inform agency personnel that you cannot provide services to the client. Probably going to let them know why too, but you just no, 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 no. Rationale. The 2018 NASW Code of Ethics explicitly acknowledges that social workers should not provide clinical services to individuals with whom they have had a prior sexual relationship. Providing clinical services to a former sexual partner has the potential to be harmful to the individual and is likely to make it difficult for a social worker an individual to maintain, bolded, appropriate professional boundaries. In addition, social workers should not engage in sexual activities or sexual contact with current or former clients, or clients' relatives, or other individuals with whom clients maintain a close personal relationship when there is a risk of exploitation or potential harm to a client. And that's coming directly from the NASW Code of Ethics 2018 1.09 Sexual Relationships. Test taking strategies applied. In the scenario, the social worker is aware that the referral is for a woman with whom he had a prior intimate relationship. According to the 2018 NASW Code of Ethics, it is unethical to provide clinical services to this client, since there should be no therapeutic relationship between them. Meeting with the client to discuss her problem or scheduling an intake are both inappropriate. Informing a supervisor is advisable but not sufficient action to properly act ethically in this situation. The social worker must decline the referral even if he is the only Spanish speaking clinician. Services may need to be located for the client at another agency if there is no one linguistically competent to counsel her at the existing one. And I'd say, won't be on the, just ethically, somebody you've had friendship with, not even sexual relationship with, or a family member of a friend. I worked for an agency and I had an assessment scheduled with a teenager, and then I noticed the name of the teenager's guardian. I'd never met the teenager before, but the name of the teenager's guardians were that was grandparents were people I knew very well, and the client was seen by another associate therapist. So okay, that there covered 13, only 13, 13 questions in this te- uh, in this book from the Professional Values and Ethics. I've been calling subsection 1. They're calling competency 11, professional values and ethical issues. Take a break. I know I'm going to. And after lunch, I'll make the second video for today, which has 18 questions. I will be breaking that one into 2 separate videos.